Hello world, welcome to another HTML/CSS tutorial. In this one, we're going to be building the Spotify playlist card component from scratch. Before we delve into the markup, let's figure out the things we'll need. And before you listen to me doing it, I suggest you try for yourself. So, we have a card here as a parent of this cover and the description. Inside the cover, we have a title and a subtitle, a watermark, which is going to be an IMG, and this play button. A closer look at it tells us that it fades in and moves smoothly, but when I hover over the button itself, there's no transition, but it does get a little bit bigger. Let's start converting the ideas into markup. I need a card, so I'll have an article with the class of card, with the cover, and a description as its direct children. Inside the cover, I want a cover text, a wrapper for the play button with the class of PV wrapper, and an image for the watermark. Cover text is going to have an H1 for the title and an H4 for the subtitle, which are going to be top 50 and global. The wrapper is going to hold the play button, so I'll create a button with the class of play button whose text content is going to be a solid triangle pointing right. The Spotify logo PNG is located in assets/images. In the description, we're going to have an H1 with a class of PL name and P with a class of PL about. And that's it for our markup. I have the reset and the color set up, so it's not really building from scratch. Anyway, let's start by placing the content at the center of the screen by giving the body a display of grid and a place content of center. This is not good for a real project, and since it isn't one, I'm okay with giving these props directly to the body. Apart from this, I need the background to be var color BG primary, and the font family Lotto Sans Serif. You can get this off of Google Fonts. And the color of color text primary. Let me first style this watermark. I want it to be 18 pixels wide. Since CSS preserves the aspect ratio, I don't need to explicitly provide a height. I need the cover to be a square, so let me give it a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. Also, I don't want this to be a part of the document flow, so I'll give it a position of absolute. And since I want it to position relative to the cover, I'll give the position of relative to the cover. I need a left of 1 rem and a top of 1 rem to get a look that's similar to Spotify's. Also, I'll need to reduce the opacity to half. We also need to make sure that the description does not exceed that 200 pixel mark. So I'll come style the parent card and give that a width of 200 pixels. This value is getting repeated, and it's also important that whatever it is has to be the same for the width and the height of the cover. A nice use case to bring in a custom prop. I'll call it size and give it the value 200 pixels and refactor the code to use the variable instead of the hard-coded value. Now when I wish to change the size, I can just do it at one place. Let's give the elements some breathing space inside the card by adding some padding to the card. I need the background color to be color BG secondary. I also need a border radius of 0.5 rems. Also, I want the cursor to transform into a pointer when hovering over the card. I need the cover to have a gradient background whose colors I already have set up, so I'll do a linear gradient of the two colors, and by default, the direction is top to bottom, so this is going to do it for the background. It also needs a shadow, so I'll go ahead and give it 2 shadows, one being 0 off horizontally, 4 pixels down with a blur of 16 pixels, and the color black with an opacity of 40%. And another shadow that will be 8 pixels down with a blur of 18 pixels, and a color of black that is 20% opaque. Coming to the cover, I need the content to be centered, so I use flex to achieve this, a display of flex, a direction of column, justify content of center, and align items of center. Let's give this a margin of 2 rems at the bottom. We need a text align of center on cover text, so I'll select it and supply text align of center. Let me select the cover title and increase the font size a little bit. Also make it thick and select the cover subtitle and transform it to uppercase and give some space between the letters. I want a line in between and I want it to be a part of the cover text, so I'll make use of the after pseudo element. But before that, I'll have a display of flex and the direction of column on the cover text so that I can change the order of elements later. You'll see it in action in a bit. For every pseudo element, the content property is a mandate without which the element will not show. I need this 100% wide, maybe 2 pixels tall, a background of white, and border radius of 1 pixel. Now, the title, the subtitle, and after pseudo elements are flex kits. We'll have an order of 0 by default, making them follow the document order. And therefore, we have the after element as the last child. Had I made this into a before, it would have appeared on top of the title, like so. As I want the subtitle to be the last one, I'll give it an order of 1, which will force it to be the last child and push it below the line. I can now reduce the opacity, give a margin top, and a margin bottom of 1 rem to the line. Let me decrease the opacity of the cover text itself a little bit. Also get the text nudged a little upward by translating Y by -1 rem. It's time we work on the button now. I don't want this one also to be a part of the doc flow, so we'll give a position of absolute. And since the cover already was positioned to be relative, I can give the wrapper a right of 1 rem and a bottom of 1 rem. We need the button to be a green circle with white text. So let's give it a width of 40 pixels and a height of 40 pixels, a color of white, and a background of color accent green. We'll get rid of the border with border none and add a border radius of 50% to make it a circle. And also let's increase the font size to 1.8 rems. We also need a shadow for this, so I'll give a box shadow of 0, 8 pixels, and 8 pixels, and RGBA of black with an opacity of 30%. Coming to the description, we want the playlist name to be a little bit smaller and have a bit of margin at the bottom. Playlist description is a little smaller than the name, so I'll make it 0.9375 rem, which is equal to 15 pixels in normal scenarios. I know using rems in this case seems like an overkill, but it's good to get in the habit of using them in my opinion. Can save a ton of time in responsive designs. Okay, back to the problem at hand. We want the color to be muted a little bit. So we give it a color of color text muted. Also, let's give it a margin bottom of 0.5 rems. Let's get to working with the hover effects now. I want this play button to be sitting at the bottom of the cover without being visible, and on hover of the card, I want it to move up to this position with 100% visibility. So, one way to achieve this is to have a bottom of 0 here, and on the hover of the card, having the bottom of 1 rem. We can say on card hover, select PB wrapper, and add the bottom property with the value 1 rem. Also, let's make the initial opacity to 0, and an opacity of 1 inside this hover state. Let's give a transition of 320 milliseconds and see what we get. This is working, but it's a really bad way of doing it. One reason being that when we just specify the time for transition, it's going to assume all props. And for transitions and animations, we have to keep in mind that transform is the most efficient way of moving things around. So instead of having a bottom of 0 for the initial value, I'll keep it at 1 rem, but give a transform of translate y 1 rem to make it touch the bottom of the cover. Now, we'll be specific about what properties to transition on. We can specify multiple props and timings separated by commas. So we want the transform for 320 milliseconds and opacity for 320 milliseconds. And on hover of the card, I'll transform its Y to 0 and opacity to 1. Now this is a lot better. We also need the card's background to change to lighter gray, so on card hover, change background to 242424. We'll also need to add a transition of background 320 ms to the card. And now, we want the button to scale on hover, so play button hover, transform of scale 1.08. Now since we gave a transition to the wrapper, the button itself is not going to have one, and that's the reason I decided to have a wrapper around the button so that I could opt out of having a transition on the button. There you have it, the almost replica of a Spotify playlist card. Hope you enjoyed this one.